So Curtis Ogden is a senior associate with the Interaction Institute for Social Change. He's also a co-founder and lead facilitator of the Food Solutions New England Network. So Food Solutions New England is a regional 6-state network that unites the food system community around a shared set of values. This is democratic empowerment, racial equity and dignity for all, sustainability and trust. And also strengthens the movement's ability to realize the New England food vision. So Curtis also wanted me to share that he was born in Buffalo and lived in Ithaca for 4 years in the late 90s. His parents both lived in the Cortland area for the last few decades, so he's very familiar with New York State, even though he's bringing us at times maybe a New England perspective. So welcome, Curtis. We're so happy you're here, and the stage is yours.
Thanks so much, Gabrielle, and it's great to be here. Let me just do a volume check. Can you hear me okay?
You're great on my end.
Okay. And just please do chat if you're having a hard time hearing me. Also, I was on a call this morning with Food Solutions New England colleagues, and my camera was a little bit funky. So you never know what technology is going to do. It was snowing this morning, so who knows if that has something to do with it. It's great to be here. Thank you, Gabrielle, for the invitation. I also wanted to mention just at the get-go here that I've been involved with some wonderful work in New York State related to creating a vision for New York State's food system. And if you don't know about it, I'm putting that link in the chat. I worked over a couple of years during the pandemic with CADE down in Oneonta to pull together interest holders from across sectors in the food system to create this vision. And CADE is this mighty nonprofit, small nonprofit that's been supporting that part of New York State for over 30 years, sort of leaned into the trust they have with a lot of people to put together this vision. So if you don't know about it, there it is. I want to promote that wherever I go, and it links very closely to what we're doing at Food Solutions New England. I also wanted to do something that we do regularly at Food Solutions New England, which is as we get into our meetings, we do a bit of a grounding, a pause, a slow down to reconnect ourselves with ourselves. Sometimes we're moving so quickly, our brain is out here and our body's being left behind. We know sometimes we're moving so quickly, it's almost as if our feet are not on the earth. And what we're learning, and I'm learning in work with Indigenous partners, is that it's really crucial to reestablish connection with our mother, with Mother Earth. So I'm just going to invite us into a quick practice. We like to say that this is an invitation, never an expectation. The spirit of this invitation is inviting you to disengage from multitasking, to really bring your focus to this moment, to this now, and to reestablish some connection with your full self, with one another, and the planet that sustains us. So if you'd like to go on this adventure with me, please do. If you feel like you want to do something else in the spirit of grounding, certainly inviting you into that. So the first thing I'd like us to do is just, whether we're seated or standing, I'm standing, is just to feel your feet on the floor. Feel your feet on the floor, how they make connection to the ground, and how we are supported just by bringing our attention to our feet. If we're seated, we can bring our attention to other touch points where our seat meets the seat, so to speak, where our back meets the back of the chair. Maybe our arms are being supported by the arms of the chair, if those exist, but just notice yourself being held. It's a little bit of a miracle and a gift every day that we are held in place by gravity, by the planets circling this planet, the sun that warms us. So many things have to work right each day just for us to live. So just taking that in, taking in with appreciation what supports us right now. And then I'm going to invite us to do 3 breaths. And the breaths I'm going to invite us to do are perhaps a little bit of an unusual way of breathing than most of us are used to. I'm going to invite you to breathe into this point that's not up here, but below your belly button, just about 2 inches below your belly button. There's a community I'm a part of called Respectful Confrontation and Fierce Civility. Our work is to cultivate the capacity to help people work together across all kinds of divides. And one of the ways we do that is to make sure that our nervous systems are settled and that we can help one another co-regulate nervous systems so we can engage in important and sometimes challenging conversations and work. So you can put your fingers just here below your belly button, and we're going to do a test breath. So the first breath is breathe into that spot, and you'll know you're doing it right if your abdomen rises. So you breathe in through your nose, and then breathe out through your mouth and let your belly go back toward the spine. Now we're going to do 3 breaths that way. The first one is for yourself, honoring yourself, breathing in to that center point through your nose, just appreciating you, who you are, that you're here today, and breathing out slowly, letting your belly go back toward the spine. Nice and easy. And a second breath in, this breath is for this community that's gathered here. Breathing in through your nose, just appreciations for everyone who's here gathered, for the important work you do in and around the state. Letting that breath go out through your mouth, belly settling. And a final third breath. And this one is for Mother Earth, right? Who provides the food that sustains us, the food you rescue for those in need. So breathing in and then breathing out through your mouth, slowly, 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 letting that settle. And then just notice how you feel. Anything going on in your body that might be different than before we started. Inviting any of you who want to share reactions to that experience in the chat, or anything else you might have done to just ground right now. How was that? What do you notice? Gabrielle says that was needed and beautiful. So whether you did it or didn't, I can tell you that the world challenges us right now in these times every day to become dysregulated and to break, to break from the things actually that sustain us. And so the reminder is really, really, really to ground, to stay grounded. And Anna, thanks for sharing. Oh, a pregnant belly, so that the breathing was a great connection to the baby. I love that. And Brianna, appreciate having the exercise in my tool belt moving forward. Wonderful. It doesn't have to be long. It can be brief. And I tell you, I bring this to all different kinds of places, to the halls of Harvard, to small nonprofits, to work and community. And Kate's saying it was a great reminder. And in fact, that is I love the word reminder, because there's so much in these times that we're being called to remember. Again, this comes from much of the teachings I'm receiving from Indigenous partners and elders, including the Haudenosaunee there in New York State. We need to remember, and remember, if you put that as remembering, it's kind of bringing ourselves back together, bringing knowledge back together, bringing people back together, bringing ourselves back together with the planet. And that is definitely a theme that we will continue to lean into during this session, and that Food Solutions New England is leaning into as it continues now in its 12th year of work, which includes the 10th offering of the Food Solutions New England 21-day Racial Equity Habit Building Challenge, which I'll share a little bit more about. So could we move the slides along, please? Thank you. So I'm here to share with you a little bit more about Food Solutions New England. And just to be clear, that when we talk about New England, we know that many of these boundaries that exist are fabrications, right? They're real politically, but landscapes have other ideas about where the boundaries are. And so we talk about New England as encompassing 6 states, but we are partnering with those in New York State and some up in Canada. So these boundaries are fluid. But for right now, just as we talk about it as a political reality and entity, Food Solutions New England is a 6 state network that envisions a powerful food movement that democratically transform this region's food system so that it's sustainable, just, and resilient. If we go to the next slide, you'll see how we have this represented. We went through a visioning process a number of years ago, and as a result came up with this rendering, which you might have to zoom into a little bit to see more closely. But essentially what it lifts up is our vision as the sun in the distance, where we are projecting a time when at least 50% of our food is produced in this region for people in this region, by people in this region. And that means food that is farmed and also fished. And you'll see some of our core values emanating from that sun. And then this pathway of diverse people walking along with different signposts. Those signposts are some of the leverage areas that we identified through a system mapping exercise years ago to figure out what is ours to do with so much happening in our region. What does a 6 state regional food network have to contribute? And so we've leaned into these leverage points of promoting democratic empowerment. We recognize that democracy and sovereignty have a lot to do with getting to our vision, that we need to tell a new story about our food system. Many people don't understand where their food comes from. Many people don't understand the history of food. Many people don't understand the powerful potential of leaning into food as a leverage point for everything from economies to health to cultural evolution. And then also we talk about a sustainable economy, which is what many, many people are thinking about right now as things unravel. Here's an opportunity to relocalize and re-regionalize our food systems and other aspects of our economy that can lead to thriving communities. So there's much more to be said about this. But given the time I have, I'll just say we have a number of strategies to get there. And one of them is to understand the importance of equity, the importance of belonging, the importance of fierce love to bring about this vision. If we could go to the next slide. We have learned over the past 12 years, as many of us are, that the indigenous people who have long stewarded the lands which those of us and our ancestors have arrived on, and many have claimed, and these lands support us. They have long been stewarded by indigenous people that are still with us. Their stories are being told more loudly. Their ways of living on the earth, of tending to the earth, are now being celebrated by more of us. And so in that spirit, we like to begin before too long in any session to lift up what we call our land acknowledgement. In New England, that means lifting up many different people that are still with us, with whom we are actually partnering, learning from, and learning with. So Food Solutions New England would like to acknowledge that the area we are currently calling New England is still home to the Penobscot, to the Passamaquoddy, to the Maliseet, to the Micmac, Abenaki, Mohegan, Wampanoag, Pequot, Nipmuc, Massachusetts, Neontic, Pokanek, Pennacook, and Narragansett peoples, among many, many others. We strive to honor and respect the many indigenous peoples connected to this territory on which we gather. And we encourage others to learn about who has been traditionally on the lands you now occupy, that you work, where you reside, who is still there, and how can you work in support and in solidarity with their efforts for sovereignty, for well-being, for rematriation, and for reclamation. We hope that you'll do the same wherever you are. May their spirits rise up and continue to hold us close as we transform and contribute to a culture of equity, racial equity, gender equity, economic justice, well-being, and belonging. May that be so. So that is what we like to lift up as part of our land acknowledgement. And curious if any of you do the same. Would love to hear that by way of chat in the comments. Anybody does land acknowledgements? Is that a practice you do consider, might consider? And if we could move the slides along. So our agenda that flows from the rest of this time, which we've already gotten into a bit, is to understand a little bit more why we at Food Solutions New England, and we would suggest everybody in this country we call the United States, sustain a focus on racial equity as connects to other forms of equity to advance food systems that work for everyone. We want to uplift the 21-day challenge for your consideration and share a little bit more about how you might participate in that next April and leading up to it. To understand the fundamental nature of intersectionality and interdependence, that there are many issues that are woven into food systems and also addressing racism, again, gender, issues around indigeneity, and issues around economic justice and health. And then we'll certainly want to celebrate our collective commitments before we close up. Before we go to the next slide, where we get into talking about racial equity, I just wanted to ask for anybody to respond to and hear, if you want to take yourselves off mute, or if you'd like to put this in the chat. Why might we consider work for racial equity, racial justice, when we're talking about food or food rescue? Why might we do that? Early days at Food Solutions New England, when we started talking about racial equity, a few people came to us and said, you're actually taking your eye off the ball. Why are you talking about race and racism? Curious what responses you all might have. Again, in the chat, or just take yourselves off mute and share out loud. And whether or not you're going to share out loud, I'm just inviting you to sit with the question for 30 more seconds. What does food rescue have to do with race and racism in this country? So Elise says systemic racism, historical segregation, wealth exclusion is a key contributor to food inequity. So why do we need to rescue food? Why are some lacking the food they need? There is a history, right, that is now increasingly being told and corrected about who is included, who was left out of certain decisions, of certain economic arrangements. That continues to happen, right? Martha shares, because race impacts access to food and culturally appropriate food, right? So the food we produce and share is not culturally neutral. It may lift up and privilege certain cultures and not others. And race and ethnicity can be closely interlinked. And so that can mean that people who have a certain presenting identity feel more included in the food system than others. Due to redlining, yes, and historical systems of oppression, many groups are living in food deserts. I know some people don't talk about food deserts, they talk about food swamps. Some people talk about food apartheid, with little access to food, let alone nutritious food. So a lot of what happens in terms of food not being accessible in certain urban areas is not by accident, right? There's a lot of this is by design, including policies that were put in place long ago that have cast very long shadows. Kate mentions this system was built on the backs of Black, Indigenous, and other people of color and continues to perpetuate racism. So who was it who worked the lands and the plantations? Who are the farm workers? What's their identity? How have they been treated? How have they been included in certain benefits for employees? Who has been left out of certain of those programs? If you go back and look at history, some of the key decisions around post World War II in terms of who had access to housing, who had access to benefits, and who could build wealth really did play out along racial lines. And to be clear that race has been a changing concept. Who has been considered white has changed over time. For a while, people of Eastern European descent were not white, and they were left out. Italians were left out. Jewish people were left out. So it has been a case of moving target, but generally with this idea that people who are defined as white benefiting more than those who do not. Interconnectedness, all injustices, systemic imbalances are connected. The land food is grown on was stolen land, Brianna mentions, right? So many lands that we grow food on were stolen from indigenous people. They were chased off the land, if not killed. Racism takes our humanity away. Disconnect from the earth makes it possible to accept wasted food as the norm, says Megan. So y'all are on it. You all get it. And recognizing we all may be at different points in our learning around this. The point is not to blame or shame anybody, but really to invite people into a deeper learning about what has been going on, what continues to go on. And this can be shocking to people. It can elicit a lot of shock, sadness, denial. We're seeing that evident in some of our political struggles right now, which again is why we want to lean into an ethic of care, consideration, and love while still holding lines around accountability. And so that really is the spirit of the equity challenge. If we could go to the next slide, I'll say a little bit more about the challenge. So it was back in 2014 that my colleague, Dr. Joanne Burke, who is a now retired nutritionist at UNH, New Hampshire, my dear colleague, Karen Spiller, who wished she could be with us today. We both grew up in Michigan. She's a Black woman. I'm obviously a white man. The three of us got to thinking about what we could do to advance the conversation in our region about race and racism and what they have to do with creating the better food systems we know we need. Why did we need to talk about race? Why did we need to address racism? We give a big tip of our hats to Debbie Irving. If any of you know her work, the book Waking Up White, and also Dr. Eddie Moore Jr., who is a Black man living in Iowa who started the White Privilege Conference many years ago and runs the Privilege Institute. The two of them have long been working on these issues, and Debbie had highlighted what she called an equity challenge in her book, Waking Up White. And when I saw it, I thought, well, maybe there's something we could do to supercharge this and use this amazing technology we have. Why not lean into a practice of 21 days so that they say that there's a minimum of 21 days dedicated practice where your system starts to develop this as more of a habit. And so if we go to the next slide, in our first offering of this, what we did is we sent out an invitation for people from the 6 states in our region to join us in an experiment that we would send out a series of prompts over 21 days that had different things to do with race and racism and indigenous issues and what the problems were, what the solutions might be, and invite people into some reflection online, in group meetings that we had, in their communities, in their organizations. If we go to the next slide, that first year we got about 250 people to attend from our region. We decided that was good enough to do a second year, and those numbers jumped up to about 1,000 from our region and a little bit beyond. We did it again the following year, is about 2,000. Lo and behold, a few more years later, we were up to about 10,000 people participating, all US states, most of the Canadian provinces, 30 countries around the world. We've continued this challenge up until present day, and we'll be celebrating the 10th year in April, and can say we've had more than 40,000 people participate from 40 different countries, all US states, all Canadian provinces, And those are just the direct participants, nothing to say about then the people they have touched and the teams that they work with. So we count thousands that have been touched by this challenge, and we're seeing, hearing, feeling the change in the conversation in ways that we hadn't imagined possible when we set out to do this in 2014. And clearly we're not alone. So much has happened since the murder of George Floyd and other things where people have become truly sensitized and aware to these issues and much more caring and concerned. So there are ways that you can get involved in the challenge. I'm going to share a little bit more about how it works. After you sign up, there are ways that you can invite others to sign up via a whole kit of email prompts and newsletters and social media suggestions and graphics you can download from an outreach kit. If we go to the next slide, you'll see a little bit more about how the challenge works. The basic idea here is when you sign up, then in April, on day 1 of the 21, you start receiving email prompts at 6 a.m. Eastern every day. Some people are early risers, and we hear from them early about their reflections. We invite people to do as much of each prompt and as many of the prompts as they can. We know we're all busy. 21 days of reflection can be a lot, but again, we find that it is a wonderful way to dedicate and build practice. There are different ways that people can participate in reflecting through their own journals. We have an online forum where people can share and lean in. They can think about and share materials. We hear many people that take these back to their families, to their places of work, to their communities, and discuss. And so those discussions, again, could happen in ways that are online, small groups, maybe a single other conversation partner. And then the idea here is that we take all of these reflections and these discussions and move them slowly into practice in different ways. But we don't underestimate the power of just talking, right? Sometimes people say, well, we're just talking, but we're not doing. If we're not talking about the issues, we won't be doing anything about them. And often the talk and the narrative and the story that we're telling about things and why they are and how they could be different is really important. So we don't underestimate the power of talking. If we go to the next slide, again, this is sort of representing the fact that we have these prompts and there is an online discussion. We get a mighty and small group that tends to stick with the online discussion. We moderate it throughout, and we appreciate all the contributions that we get. If we go to the next slide, we've also introduced hosted discussions over Zoom that we do every Friday during the challenge. So Karen and I do this from noon to 1:30. Anybody can show up. The challenge is free. These discussions are free. The registration links for these conversations come out in the daily emails. We've had as many as 75 people jump in on those discussions on a Friday from maybe a dozen different countries to maybe more like 18. And no matter how many attend, we spend time in small groups, in the large group, and it's always very, very powerful. We've made available other resources. If you go to the next slide, we created a discussion guide because many people were saying to us, you know what, we're bringing this in-house to our organization, to our business, to our government agency. And we've heard from all of those. We've heard businesses, philanthropies, universities, university departments, churches, synagogues, mosques, all bringing these resources. And how do we actually navigate these conversations? And so we developed a discussion guide a few years ago that's free and available for download to guide people on how to create agendas and facilitation tips and how to handle hot button issues. So that's available. As well, we offer a free training to people who want to facilitate groups during the challenge. So we'll share more information about that as people register for the challenge. A few more slides and then I will stop talking and field any questions or comments. Another opportunity is for organizations to officially sign up for the challenge and to advertise that they're participating. We make digital badges available for people to put on their websites. We've had up to 600 different organizations sign up in a single year to participate in the challenge. That included the USDA, that included town governments, that included food businesses and the like. So that is a possibility for those who might be interested. Next slide just reminds us that we can also use various social media platforms to connect with one another. We use the hashtag FSNE Equity Challenge. We understand that social media platforms can be a little bit fraught these days, and so there's not an expectation, but there are still people who use those spaces very productively, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Twitter, I guess now called X. LinkedIn is actually a really productive space that many people have been using. And then the next slide is where I wanted to pause just for a moment and see, now that we've thrown all that information out at you, if there are any questions or comments that are coming up for you. Anything at all about the challenge itself, about why on earth we would invite you to do it, or anything else that you may be sitting with as a question or a challenge. Yes, and please use the raise hand button. So I know we've covered a lot of territory, going to like the history of this country and the dynamics that exist and persist to how this challenge works. But I'm curious if there are any questions that you sit with, again, whether it's about the challenge or just how on earth do we do this work in New York State, wherever you are? What are the challenges you confront with beginning conversations or continuing conversations in work for equity and justice?
Curtis, if you wouldn't mind a question from me as we're going through this. So I just want to say our food rescue crew here in the Cortland area decided to do the 21-day challenge, and it was awesome. It was very thought-provoking. I know we had some side conversations on it, and you did mention a little bit earlier, like it's everybody is so busy. So I wondered if you had just any good insights for us in making space. We have quite a few months until it hits April, making space so that we could sort of sit and slow down and sort of process what this challenge brings up, because I think it's worthy and worthwhile investment of time.
Yeah.
But creating that time is very important as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's as a consultant who works with a lot of organizations around this, whether wanting to integrate equity more into their work or collaborating more deeply or sharing leadership, all of those threads seem to be kind of interwoven right now. The one common challenge is, when do you actually create and make the space so that you can do something different? It's really impossible to do something different if you're just so filled to the brim that you're managing everything that's on your plate. And I say that with compassion, because I know many of us are parents or caring for elders, or we might be single parents, or we might be managing health issues. I mean, there's just so much that's up right now. So I bring it with great compassion. And yet, if we do not carve out the spaces to talk about these issues that can help elucidate actually what some of the real leverage points are, right? As opposed to chasing other things that may not be getting us anywhere. It might just be busy work. It might not be. But if we don't stop even for 5 minutes, I like to work with clients, who I coach, to say, what are 5 minutes you could carve out of your day? With organizations, could you even have a 10-minute reflection meditation on a quote? If you have an equity commitment statement, could you read it at the beginning of a meeting and just sit with it? Start small. If you try and go too big, I think it does get overwhelming, but surely we can look at our schedules and say, I can carve out a minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Start small, build from there. And, try and do it in a way that truly nourishes people. Um, we know that these conversations can get people pretty worked up. And again, this is why I think it's important that we do the grounding, the breathing, the sort of somatic, if you will, or body work. Um, I actually do feel like, leaning into this equity work is a total blessing because it demands that we practice new things that service all of us, meaning all of our individual selves, our groups, our communities. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I can also share some examples, and we do this in the trainings and the facilitator trainings and orientation webinars of how organizations are figuring this out to integrate it without overburdening and overwhelming people. There's a question here from Kate. Are there trainings that are good for groups to continue to deepen their understanding of building equity and justice? There are many. My organization, the Interaction Institute for Social Change, offers 2 online trainings, one called The Fundamentals of Facilitation for Racial Justice Work. You can check that out on our website at interactioninstitute.org. There's also a training called Advancing Racial Justice in Organizations. So one course is more about facilitation tips and tricks, and the other is about how you create change in organizations. There's an organization called Race Forward that you can check out. We have connections with them organizationally, and they do some interesting trainings on systemic racism. There's a lot out there. We do lift up many of those partners and those kinds of resources on the resource page for the 21-day Racial Equity Habit Building Challenge. So Avery has shared a couple of the links taking you to different aspects of the challenge. But if you go to foodsolutionsne.org 21-day Racial Equity Habit Building Challenge, you'll see embedded links that take you to a resource page. All of this is free. Resource page, past prompts that you can go to right now and pull up a prompt and some discussion questions. The discussion guide is available there. And again, that is free. So many books that you could read. We lift up podcasts. We lift up films. So there's a lot that's there. Anything else that's coming up as a question or a comment?
Curtis, how soon is too soon to sign up for the 21-day challenge?
You can do it right now. You can do it right now. Registration is open.
And we do have some space for another question or two, so please don't hesitate. I know that there's always a lot to think about when we bring up topics like this, and so we understand sometimes that pause as well, and we do respect that. But if there's anything else that you guys are thinking about, please feel free to pop it in the chat or to just unmute yourself and ask Curtis the question directly.
While people are thinking on that, I did want to share this because Karen Spiller, who I do this work with most closely for Food Solutions New England, and if you come to the challenge or come to a Friday or come to an orientation webinar, you'll see the 2 of us. We're clear that, we can't use the same tools that have been used to divide people to get out of where we're at. And so we do see in certain places and spaces, things being held up as being in the name of justice that subtly or more egregiously actually might be poised to further divide us. Years ago, when we decided to talk about race, people came to us and said, well, isn't this really about class? And our response was, well, The thing is, if you only talk about class, then race gets obscured. Here we are that many years later, and what we understand is if you only talk about race, then you forget that the reason that race and racism were created was to justify economic injustice. So we got to hold it all together and understand that racism is a system that justifies dominance and control, for a few, and it seems like increasingly it's for fewer and fewer at the expense of the many and the whole. So that includes working class white folk, right? And so it has been a historical tactic to divide the working class so that they would not unite and make bigger claims and calls for justice. We're in that place again. We see how race can be a terrifying term to people, critical race theory. The dog whistles come out and people start getting really nervous. We got to hold it all. We have to understand it's about race. Yes, it's about class. Yes, it's about gender. Yes, it's about a lot of different kinds of othering that ultimately, at the end of the day, justifies the power and dominance of a precious few, right, at the expense of growing numbers of us. So you don't know the Poor People's Campaign, Reverend Barber, continuing Dr. King's work. He's actually here in our region at Yale University at the Center for Public Theology. We got to just stop finding ways to further divide us. We got to unite. We got to unite, understand our history, and understand that the only way forward is together. For creating the Indigenous Peoples Map, if you go to it's a website out of Canada. If you look for Indigenous Territories Map, it's an interactive map that I can send to Gabrielle later so you can have that link. Kim, oh, there it is, Native Land. Thank you, Kate. And Kim Murch, as a community organizer, facilitator, and resource distributor, the biggest challenge that I have experienced is actually understanding and gleaning what people do know. Right on. And I hear in that the importance of just slowing down and listening, asking questions, observing, and not making too many assumptions. I think that is a good place to start because we can walk into a room and see, I don't care who the person is. Oh, that's a white person, so they must X, Y, and Z, or that's an indigenous person, they must X, Y, and Z. And I love being proven wrong and showing how my assumptions are off base. So I'm going to end, given there's just 1 minute left, I think, of my presentation time.
Yes.
This is
Thank
a
you, Curtis. I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but I think it's an important question. So Brianna, if you scroll up a little bit, she
oh
did ask a really, and that will be our
oh
last question, and then we'll
oh
let you
yeah
close.
okay.
Because I think it was a really good point that many of us probably deal with this situation.
What if leadership talks about a commitment to DI, but when opportunities to support BIPOC folks become apparent, they are hesitant to take action or just don't? Just gentle reminders of their espoused goals and hope they do the right thing. Any recommendations on how to hold leadership accountable in a way that is productively confrontational? I love that question. And it's where a lot of my consulting work with colleagues is focused. We need to have an offline conversation about that or another whole conversation. There's so many reasons for resistance. And so I think the first is not to see lack of movement as being about lack of will. A lot of leadership in organizations is just overwhelmed right now, and they're afraid. They're afraid of taking a step that does further harm or hurt. And of course, no action can be causing further harm and hurt. And so I think I can speak for my colleague Karen that, we just need more loving accountability partners of some form within and outside of organizations, and sort of holding this line around fierce love and accountability. Trust that people want to do the best thing, but understand they may not know how, that they're afraid. We got to create more of these kinds of spaces where people can really lean in. There's a lot more to be said about that I can share as resource links to various blogs that a few of us have written. But I feel like you're kind of speaking to one of the big challenges of our times. Absolutely. And maybe also by way of a response, I've been reading this quote by James Baldwin that not many people, it seems like, know, and it comes from a book that not many people, including myself, knew about, called Nothing Personal. And so I'm just going to share this quote and then I will turn it back to Gabrielle. And I'm thinking about what's going on here in our country. I'm thinking about what's going on in the Middle East right now. I'm thinking about all the tragic loss of life that happens every day in places we don't hear about and the suffering there. And so this is what Baldwin wrote. This is why one must say yes to life and embrace it whenever it is found. And it is found in terrible places. Nevertheless, there it is. For nothing is fixed forever and forever and forever. It is not fixed. The earth is always shifting. The light is always changing. The sea does not cease to grind down rock. Generations do not cease to be born, and we are responsible to them because we are the only witnesses they have. The sea rises, the light fails, lovers cling to each other, and children cling to us. The moment we cease to hold each other, the moment we break faith with one another, the sea engulfs us and the light goes out. So don't let go of each other. Hold on. There's still unraveling to come. Hold each other tight. We are not solely responsible or to blame for this, but we can figure out ways that we don't contribute more to it. So I just want to thank you again for the time and for the work you do every day, you know, to support people who need the support. Just thank you so much.